Hello there and welcome to The Drum. I'm John Barron. Coming up, an Australian Homeland Security department could now be the right time. Facebooking his rivals, the senator moonlighting as a talk show host. And Melbourne rolls out ladies on its traffic lights. And joining us on the panel tonight, Ali Kadri from the Islamic Council of Queensland. Hello, Ali. Hi. Van Badham is here as well. Hello, Van.
Hello,
you're with the
John.
Guardian Australia, columnist thereat and social media phenomenon. Also with us from Willard Public Affairs, it's David Miles. Hi, David.
How are you?
Very well. And with us from Canberra as well, counter-terrorism expert Jacinta Carroll from the Strategic Policy Institute. And if that's not more than enough, you can join in as well on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum and on Facebook, where you'll also find a live stream of tonight's show. Well, first this evening to some issues around counter-terrorism. Fairfax newspapers today are reporting that the government is planning to create a Department of Homeland Security style mega agency, merging 6 agencies from 2 departments. The report says it would be built around the existing Department of Immigration and Border Protection and take a lot of responsibility from Attorney General George Brandis and give it to Immigration Minister Peter Dutton. But Josh Frydenberg, for one, would neither confirm nor deny those reports.
We're always looking to improve our level of coordination between agencies and between levels of government, but this report is speculation and I'm not going to comment on it.
Meanwhile, the Iraqi ambassador to Australia has warned of what he described as sleeping colonies of potential terrorists in Sydney and Melbourne. Dr. Hussein Ali Ameri mentions concerns radical preachers are luring young people to Islamic State with financial incentives.
We take our counter-terrorism activities extremely seriously. As you know, we've amended our laws on a number of occasions to give our law enforcement agencies stronger tools to deal with terrorism.
So, Ali Kadri, these concerns, they're apparently coming from sections of the Islamic community of sleeping colonies of potential terrorists in Sydney and Melbourne. Have you ever heard of such concerns?
No, I travel far and wide in Australia. I'm engaged with a lot of communities, Muslim communities across the country, and I've never heard this. This is the first time I'm hearing this. But don't forget, these are the same people who told us 10, 15 years ago that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction because they wanted power. So I don't really believe we can trust governments which have agendas and they want to use the fear of terrorism to further their own political goals in Iraq by scaremongering.
What would the Iraqi ambassador to Australia have to gain from drumming up fear about Wahhabists potentially radicalising Australian youth?
Simple support from Australian government. Scare them enough and get money in the name of counter-terrorism and use it for whatever purposes they want to use it to subjugate people and to continue the corruption which is the main cause of terrorism and extremism in Iraq right now.
But you must have heard mums and dads with young, particularly impressionable boys, worried about what those boys might be looking at online and whether they could be the target for being groomed and recruited.
Look, I'm not denying the fact that there are some extremists and some radicalised young people, and some people do get radicalised in Australia. But the scale at which people are talking about these sleeper cells and sleeper colonies and the languages they're talking about just pushes this problem beyond the problem it is at the moment. I mean, yes, there are a few individuals who are radicalized in extreme. I have never heard that they're getting financial incentives to go. Yes, a lot of them have traveled, but then again, this whole phenomenon is slowing down now. The attraction of ISIS has gone down in the last 2 years, not only in Australia, but across the world. And the biggest sign of this is that recently they got so desperate, they threatened frontline imams, the mainstream imams who are respected by a lot of Muslims in the country. ISIS made a special video to threaten them. So, you know, they are desperate. And these kind of rhetorics and scaremongering doesn't help.
Van, obviously, Ali, quite sceptical there, harking back to the kind of bad intelligence around WMDs and the Iraq invasion and everything else. But how concerned do you think Australians should be, or how sceptical should they be, given that we're seeing these two stories on the one day? Maybe we're going to have a new Department of Homeland Security, and maybe we've got all these sleeper cells in our cities.
Yes, and Malcolm Turnbull's down in the polls, and oh my God, we're having a national conversation about terrorism again. I mean, this is just getting boring, and the scapegoating of the Muslim community in these conversations that's done to fuel, sensationalised othering of a minority community is just disgraceful, and it's got to stop. I'm more concerned, if we're going to talk about extremism in the community, about the rise of the Australian white nationalist far right. And I think if we want to pay attention to community security, we have to look at the fact that we're seeing increased radicalisation, increased militancy amongst communities of people with overtly fascist and racist agendas who are threatening the very fabric of the multicultural society that we all value and of which we're a part. I mean, I always get very suspicious when I hear these, great anti-terrorism initiatives, because we know what stops radicalisation in communities. What stops radicalisation are jobs, education, inclusion and opportunity, and that goes as much for Muslim youth who people believe in the tiny percentages will be persuadable to extremism, as it goes for white kids in the suburbs who in tiny cases are persuadable to the cause of extremism. That's what we should be supporting, and that's what we should be encouraging. Anything else is dressing up a scapegoat in a lot of flags and noise.
Now, Jacinta, these are right in your wheelhouse. What do you make of these two aspects? First, the intervention by the Iraqi ambassador to Australia. It certainly seems like an unusual thing for him to be saying. Are you at all suspicious?
Well, it certainly is an unusual thing, and Dr. Ali actually spoke about this, that the allegation that he's made is one that we have seen in some other countries. We have seen money coming from certain sources, certainly from the Saudi government, into educational institutions and others. But Australia is a different country, and we have a different way of regulating schools and funding and other things. So I'm not sure that I've seen something of the scale that he's particularly described. But of course, funding is the lifeblood of terrorist organisations, and what we have seen is cases such as Hamdi al-Qudsi, the convicted terrorist recruiter, and more recently convictions in Sydney last year of small levels of funding being transferred from family members to Islamic State supporters in the Middle East. In Hamdi al-Qudsi's case, he was providing funds to young people, even offering a promise of a car, and financing travel of fighters into the Middle East. There's a lot of work going on to find out, well, where does that money come from? But it's actually reasonably small levels of funding, and some of it can be sourced by the recruiters themselves.
And Jacinta, on the question of the Department of Homeland Security, I mean, it's got a reassuring sort of a ring to it. They have this big sort of organisation in the United States. But, I mean, is it being overly cynical to sort of say, well, why now? Why all of a sudden are we looking at this, 15 plus years after 9/11?
Yeah, well, there's probably 3 points. Firstly is to clarify what we mean by Department of Homeland Security, and it's not perhaps what the public perception is or even what the original plan was in the US. And as you'd be aware, John, the original idea morphed very quickly into something that really combines all of the immigration and customs activities in the US, which had been divided between a bunch of agencies. And of course, we have that combined into one agency in Australia with the Department of Immigration and the Border Force. So we're mostly down the path of what that agency does already. On the reports of bringing together something that's a super portfolio across national security, I would say that it's very difficult to identify who wouldn't be included on national security these days because, as Van pointed out, for example, there's a lot of work going on in the social services side. There's a lot of work going on with communities. And the important thing, I think, isn't just what a structure might look like, but how do all the different parts of government and civil society and communities work together? So reports of a super portfolio, that's probably a structural answer. I'm not sure that we've clarified what the question is or what the need is. Working with agencies, this has been around the buoy a number of times since 2001, and specifically we've had at least 2 reviews in Australia asking, do we need a Department of Homeland Security? And as late as 2015, the answer was, no, we don't. But we do need to be continually looking at how do we best coordinate and collaborate between all of the agencies that work on counter-terrorism and border. And that's really the issue. And honestly, they're not all in the Commonwealth either. when it comes to countering terrorism, most of the action is done at the state level, where there are the ASIO, Australian Federal Police and State Police joint counter-terrorism teams. So how we share information and do that quickly is really the issue.
Yeah, David Miles, I want to get your thoughts on particularly on the politics of this, because in Peter Hartcher's piece today, he has unnamed coalition MPs saying that this is a bit of a power grab for Peter Dutton, and this is all about kind of, pushing George out the back door. He's for the chop mid-year and so on, that this is really unnecessary empire building. Is that how you see it?
No, I don't. I think you've got a couple of things here. One is about how you coordinate between departments, or whether you need to merge them together in what has been speculated about. The government has shown at various times its ability to run good coordination between departments. When Scott Morrison was the Minister for Immigration, he was able to effectively coordinate 16 different agencies in order to effectively stop the boats, which is what he did, and got unprecedented cooperation between departments. So there was no need at that point to do it. And let's not forget the idea of a Homeland Security department or a broader department was an initiative of Tony Abbott's initially, was unable to get through the Parliament. So you can do it that way, or you can work to coordinate. If it's easier to do it that way, you can bring them all together, provided you have effective controls and everyone knows who's responsible for what. I mean, in New South Wales now, part of the problem has been, we've seen through the reports of the Lindt Cafe response to that terrorist attack, was a lack of coordination, a lack of responsibility, and now New South Wales has a Minister for Counter-Terrorism who has responsibility for not a single piece of legislation. So it's pointless, because the police minister is the one that's responsible. But
you'll still have state police, federal police, different agencies. You can try and break down some of those silos, but others will surely exist.
Well, to some extent. However, having said that, Scott Morrison was able to coordinate them all together. But look, if the view of government, and obviously we're only speculating, if the view of government that the best way to handle terrorism issues in Australia is to coordinate them together into one department, then I'm all for it. We know that, the fact that the reports are coming out of the Iraqi ambassador do certainly concern me. It's not coming from the Australian government. It's coming from a foreign government. So they're representative here. We know that there's a school in Western Sydney that's had the principal sacked in the last week because, as I've read it, a recent convert to Islam refused to run de-radicalisation courses and was trying to make the school a single Islamic school out of a state government school.
But
so anything that was going to anything that is going to counter problems should be done.
The fact that he was sacked it just shows you, and he doesn't want to work with the government, shows you how ineffective the current measures to countering radicalisation is. If you have a law enforcement focus to solve a social problem, it will never work. You make 10 big departments if you want to, as long as you don't have a good relationship with the community, and which this government obviously has failed in doing so, you will not be able to counter alienation or radicalisation. So it's not necessarily the failure of that principal or that school or the community, it's the failure of the government, both New South Wales government and the federal government.
Yeah. Well, now, while we're on the subject of border security and counter-terrorism measures broadly, US President Donald Trump today has issued a new revised executive order on immigration. The first order, of course, has been tangled up in several court cases. This new action takes Iraq off the list of 7 banned countries of origin and no longer singles out Syria as a part of a specific refugee ban.
We stand by the first executive order. We felt that it was completely compliant with the law. But if your goal is to get something done in the quickest amount of time, then you have to take into consideration all of those things.
Now, opponents say that this new order is still anti-Muslim and probably illegal, and they have vowed to continue to fight it. Van, this is something of a makeover by President Trump. He didn't even appear at the press conference announcing this. They just had a still photo. Do you think that this passes that test of fairness, or is it still going to be seen around the world as targeting Muslims?
Absolutely, it's going to be seen around the world as targeting Muslims because that's what it's doing. I mean, we have to be very honest about what's going on with these anti-Muslim diatribes that are coming out of the right of politics. This is scapegoating. The real situation in America is 1 in 7 families live in food poverty. The real situation in America is that minimum wage, if you're in a hospitality industry, is $2.50 an hour. Like, the gap between rich and poor in the United States is absolutely shocking. The middle class has been eroded. So what do you know? Let's pick on a religious minority. It is absolutely religious persecution. all of the countries that were on the original ban and the countries that remain on the new version of the ban, they're not actually the countries that have been sourcing any of the terrorists that have been convicted of terrorism charges in America.
But the argument is that their screening procedure isn't as good as from other countries, like, say, Saudi Arabia, for instance, so we're going to ban them until they get their house in order.
And it's just a massive coincidence that it happens to be from a religious minority that has been serially persecuted by organisations like Breitbart, that, of course, have produced Steve Bannon, who is the chief advisor to Donald Trump. I mean, we have to look at the complete dysfunction that has accompanied Trump into office, the massive, John Oliver called it, what did he call it, incompetent Watergate, or stupid Watergate, he's calling it. Like, these executive orders are coming
The original was pretty stupid as well.
Yeah. And these are populist moves to demonise a community, to take the heat off the real problems.
He went out there and he had an agenda, and you're all shitty because he's actually doing it. I mean, you might not like what he did, but they voted for him, and he's doing the things he said he was going to do.
So if the majority tomorrow in Australia votes to persecute and pull all Muslims in an internment camp, would you agree with it?
No, I wouldn't, and I wouldn't vote for it.
So
but that wasn't also the policy of the United States either.
So, Ali, on the specific exemption, one of the notable differences is now Iraq is off the list. So there are 6 countries, not 7. What do you make of that? Is that down to political pressure? Is there something going on here? Is there any connection to our previous story about the Iraqi ambassador in this country expressing concerns?
I mean, look, definitely there's political pressure, but any ban, such ban, and with the view of making America safe, is just, excuse me, but it's just false. It's scaremongering. It's scaring the American public, because in reality, if you want to defeat ISIS, if you want to defeat ISIS ideology, then defeat this notion of clash of civilization. Defeat the notion that it's us against them, it's West against Muslims. If you defeat that notion, then ISIS is defeated, Al-Qaeda is defeated. By banning specific Muslims from specific countries, what you are telling ISIS and Al-Qaeda is that, yes, we are at war not only with you, but with Islam and Muslims, and you will have all these recruits which you can recruit and fight against us whenever we come to your country or bomb our interests in your countries.
Now, Jacinta, let's put the politics aside. On purely as a counter-terrorism measure, does this executive order from President Trump make sense?
Look, there's a couple of things. One is, as mentioned by the other speakers, he's been very clear throughout his campaign that he would do this. He would ban. So he's playing to a domestic audience, and also he has the remit to do it. In terms of security threats, however, we did some research with a partner at the University of Chicago on terrorism offences in the US since the rise of Islamic State-related convictions. And we found that the majority of people who perpetrated these were actually American citizens, 83%, and 65% were born in the US. So in terms of is the problem coming from overseas? Is the problem coming from the Middle East in terms of terrorism? This actually won't address that. So it's not really addressing the security threat. That said, of course, Islamic State and others have said the US is a target, and they have asked people who are of that citizenship or who are travelling to the US and other countries such as Australia to commit attacks. So it's not as simple as saying that what they're doing is ridiculous. It is certainly that the US is seen and as a legitimate target by terrorists, and it's also the right of every country to protect its own borders. Lebanon and Jordan are 2 countries that have banned Syrian refugees. Other countries in Europe have. And what should be noted about the US is that it's not a demon in terms of refugee resettlement. The US still, in halving its refugee intake, which is part of the executive order program under Trump, to 50,000 refugees being resettled this year, still means that it's by far and away the largest permanent resettler of refugees in the world. And with the aberrations in Europe last year of migrants streaming into Europe, with that aberration aside, the US will still be taking in more refugees from the Middle East and elsewhere than every country in Europe combined.
OK, let's return home now, because Western Australians head to the polls on Saturday, and as well as the usual baby kissing and handshaking at shopping malls and schools, pollies are turning more than ever to social media to try and get their message across.
I know how much of a worry it is when a family member gets sick late at night.
The only thing that's true is that they're yet to tell you the truth.
People are pretty lucky. OK, good luck, guys. Back to work.
The people here are really fed up with the major political parties looking for someone else to vote for, and they're turning towards One Nation.
So which
All pretty standard social media stuff, but Labor Senator Sam Dastyari has gone a little bit further, producing a pretty slick segment for Facebook that could have come from The Weekly with Charlie Pickering, except that Dastyari himself is making the pointed political jibes rather than being the target of them. Take a look.
Which one of these following people is not a One Nation candidate that Pauline Hanson believes has the right values for Australia? Roseanne Besaidenow, who wants a separate state for white South Africans and frankly believes that we're not doing enough to promote female Viagra. There's church pastor Lawrence Shave, who advertised for bikini baristas and believes he can not only cure cancer, but also homosexuality.
Now, David Miles, as of this afternoon, that had more than 250,000 views online. Do you see that as effective campaigning, or is it just sort of preaching to the choir?
Oh, look, it's a bit of preaching to the choir. I mean, in Dastyari's case, he's a New South Wales Labor right-wing senator, and it's got 280,000 views, I think I saw this afternoon. And that's great for Sam's profile, although you're likening him to a comedian. Now, if Sam wants to be finance minister one day or leader of the government in the Senate in a future Labor government, he needs to not be seen as the clown or the jokester, or the only thing he can do is essentially take the piss out of people. Now, conversely, you look at some other ads, and most of Sam's ads, by the way, get about 40-odd thousand views. I was looking at Colin Barnett's site today. A lot of his Facebook ads have got about 45,000 views.
So there's good numbers.
But his only market is Western Australia. And so on a per capita basis for what their target audience is, there wouldn't be too many people in Western Australia probably who look at Dastyari's videos, but there would be people in WA looking at Colin Barnett's. So the bang for his buck is probably greater, despite having a lower number of hits.
I think what Sam's doing is brilliant. I mean, the first rule of politics is you have to go where your people are. And Sam's people, he's very young. He's got a very long future ahead of him because he is a senator. Like, he's not subject to the whims of a local electorate. Like, Sam is speaking to what he knows is the future of the electorate and the future of voting choice.
Come on, Sam Dastyari, let's be honest. There is no way in the world that Sam Dastyari is doing all of this stuff unless he is going to a lower house seat. You do not seek to be one of the better retail politicians in this country unless you've got aspirations to move to the lower house.
Be that as it may.
There's no accident that his Twitter handle and Instagram is all Sydney Sam. Sydney Sam, Tanya Plibersek, watch your back.
Dave, let me tell you one thing. We live in a world when a reality TV star has become a president of the United States. So, you know, this argument that he will be looked at as a joker, I don't agree with it.
No, you can't. We live in a world where in one country out of 160-odd, a reality TV star became the president.
Yeah, a country very much like
ours. None of us had a voting.
Exactly. That shares our language and shares our form of communication.
Ali, do you think that this reaches anyone whose mind is not made up? Are undecided voters contemplating a vote for One Nation going to be deterred by this, or is it by definition his Facebook followers? Of course they're not going to vote for One Nation if they're following Sam Dastyari on Facebook.
It reaches the demographics which it needs to reach to, and that is young people. Young people are the future of this country. Pauline Hanson and One Nation will not exist in 20 years because the young people in this country are much more educated, much more informed, and are not afraid because of the fear-mongering which is going on. And Sam Dastyari is reaching them with the medium they understand and they're used to.
Okay. Can I quickly take that point up?
I'm going to end it there because you've already started a rumour about the future member for Sydney, and I think your work is done. There's something I really want to get to before we run out of time, because when you're standing at the pedestrian lights waiting to cross the road, have you ever stopped to wonder why both the figure in the red and green light is a male? Perhaps you haven't, but it is about to change in Melbourne CBD with the introduction of female walk and don't walk figures. It's an attempt to combat unconscious bias, although some, like the Institute of Public Affairs in Melbourne, says this is political correct gesturing. So, Van, what do you think? Is it important to point out sort of these kind of almost invisible, you know, very accepted forms of subtle sexism, or does it get a bit silly?
No, of course, it's fun. Like, what a great way of communicating to people about the unconscious and assumed biases that operate in society. I mean, this is the thing. We imbibe so many messages, and as the only woman on the panel, I can tell you from my lived experiences.
We've got Jacinta in Canberra.
Well, in the studio, certainly, I can tell you, I'm in a very male space here. And my experience is growing up not seeing myself represented in positions of authority or understood, like, men have traditionally represented humanity. You know, it's only recently that we started using words like humanity because we used to refer to man and his great journey across the earth. And challenging that is the point of this kind of intervention.
I can understand
and it's wacky and fun.
If we're talking about men, on roadwork signs digging ditches, that's gendering a profession, but gendering a pedestrian, I mean, there's no great status,
is it? Because you are always represented, but for us, who become invisibilised in what the document of our humanity is, this stuff is really important. It's a reminder to you that we are actually here, and I think that's worth the money they've paid for.
What do you think, Ellie?
I don't think. I think this is just tokenism. We could do a lot more in the space of providing women leadership and power than changing a traffic sign, because the amount of money it's going to cost, I think it's $1,500–1,600 per traffic signal. It could be better used in female education. It could be better used in helping causes of female domestic violence is a big problem. Let's spend money there instead of changing the traffic walking signs.
But if we're looking at why there's resistance to those policy initiatives, like why isn't there more money being put towards frontline domestic services? Why was all that money cut by the Liberals from community legal centres and those kind of frontline services? Because it doesn't occur to people that there are gender differences in society. And as an education mechanism, I think it's fantastic.
Jacinta, what's your view?
Well, I did some field work on this today in Canberra, and I'd echo Van's comments. The issue about unconscious bias, of course, is that it's unconscious, and you don't need to be male or female to have unconscious bias about gender. And noting that this was in the news today, I observed in Canberra the gender of the walk signs here, and the pedestrian signs in Canberra look pretty much like Chesty Bond. They are very masculine, and it's just making that note and making that gesture to think about it. And I think the people of Melbourne can look at this, that it is a trial. They can make their own minds up about it, but at least it's raising an issue to be discussed.
Yeah, David, on that question of tokenism, because the ABC, of course, has been in the news today. We're marking International Women's Day tomorrow, showcasing female on-air talent. Programs including this one, The Drum, will have a female host and an all-female panel as well. Now, some think that this is a good idea. Some say, no, this is the worst kind of tokenism. I mean, these two stories have been kind of almost clustered together today. What is your take?
I think it's utterly ridiculous that the ABC is doing that. I think it is absolute tokenism.
Oh, do you feel excluded?
No, I think it's a stupid way of going about it to actively exclude one gender in order to promote another. Because at the moment,
boardrooms, the Parliament, the judiciary, and the leadership of most movements.
The ABC showcases its great female talent every single day. Frankly, the highest profile people on the ABC, Lee Sales hosts 7:30.
Tony Jones. Paul Barry.
Tony Jones.
John Barry.
Give me a break. But isn't part of it that it is making it perfectly clear
Evening news in Sydney
that
every single night,
jobs.
7 p.m. Evening news in Sydney every single night. Annabelle Crabb has an enormously high profile on Fran Kelly on Radio National, Patricia Carvallis. You've got fantastic women in the ABC that are showcased every single day, and you don't improve that by telling men that are also quality journalists and hosting programs, you have to go away. It's such tokenism. There is so much talent on the ABC now to prove it's barely been an issue. There are more journalists, female journalists in this country than there are male journalists in this country.
And the gender pay gap in the media affects women as well. Is it 20%? Those figures came out last year.
Again,
this is what we mean about
this is going to be a topic that will no doubt come up again tomorrow. But for today,
how are you going to deal with the bias and the traffic lights of having them all in
Thank you to our panellists tonight, Ali Kadri, Van Baden, David Miles and Jacinta Carroll in Canberra. Tomorrow, Ellen Fanning will be back with you. I'll see you for another Trump-tastic trip to Planet America on Friday night. Hope you can join me then. Good night.